Is there such thing as too many blast beats? Well, the anthropomorphic exoneration by capital discombobulation seeks to answer just that question. Welcome to an episode of Young James Does Death Metal. Let's do this shit. Okay, so for the 3 or 4 people who are going to watch this and actually care a little bit, I gotta lay a little backstory. So, my buddies on the Into the Combine podcast, I highly recommend them. Uh, they invited me on to do an episode with them about hardcore, and everybody, a lot of people know that I'm a big hardcore guy, but I like other types of metal too, death metal and thrash metal and groove metal and shit like that. So, but after I came on, I reached out to them on Twitter and was like, hey, I've been paying a lot of attention to hardcore lately. I'm looking to do something different. And I'd like to get into some death metal. And I've listened to some death metal over the short 23 years I've been alive, but not a whole lot. And what I've heard, I've liked. Some of it I haven't. It's just one of those things where maybe I listen to an album or two and then I kind of put it to the side. So they gave me 15 albums as kind of a entry into death metal. What would kind of sway someone who maybe likes a little bit more extreme metal to venture further down the death metal rabbit hole? And so I promised them that since they did that episode for me, that I would do a review of all 15 albums that they suggested. And so here we are, fuckers. So, is there such thing as too many blast beats? Well, the Anthropocene Extinction by Cattle Decapitation, which I had already heard this album. I listened to it when it first came out, and I enjoyed it. I think it came out in like 2016, so just a couple years ago, and I enjoyed it. I didn't listen to it a whole lot, but I gave it 3 or 4 playthroughs, and so this album wasn't new to me by any stretch of the imagination. But I noticed that my tastes have changed just a little bit in the past couple of years, and we'll get to that later on in this review. So there's 3 things that I'm going to do to start off each and one of these reviews. And the first is, what activity was I doing while I was listening to this album? And I was going for a jog or a jog. I'm not sure if I'm pretty sure it's jogging. And I ran about 3.5, 4 miles while I was listening to this thing. And I can't remember if I got it all done on my run or not, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, so I was running when I was listening to this album. What beer was I drinking when I was listening to this album? Which is obviously stupid because I was not drinking beer while I was running. But I am drinking a Blue Moon while doing this review. So, beer, Blue Moon. And, describe this album in a few words. Blast beats. Okay, so I think this album was kind of the least death metal on the list, and so that's kind of why I wanted to start with it. I figured, it kind of bridges the gap between maybe more like kind of deathcore and death metal, but not. It's not one or the other, I don't think. It probably leans more towards death metal, but, and so I thought this would be a good album, if I had never heard any death metal at all, that this would probably be the first thing on the list that they gave me to listen to. And, going back to when I first listened to it, I remember that I liked it because of, I thought it was brutal at the time, I guess, which not saying that it's not completely brutal, but it's not as brutal as some other death shit out there. And I was listening to a lot of deathcore at the time, and so the blast beats and the vocal style and the guitars and everything, it wasn't like too over this Cattle Decapitation album. None of that stuff was too overbearing because I'd been hearing it in deathcore for a year or two before I listened to it. So coming back to it 2 years later, it was kind of interesting to hear it and hear how my tastes have evolved because I no longer really get into blast beats and that kind of crap. I don't need that to make a song or a band hard or brutal. You know, they're almost, I almost kind of got sick of blast beats. They seem kind of gimmicky to me. But I think they're done tastefully in this Cattle Decapitation album. I don't think they're, super overbearing, and with all the layering of the guitars and stuff over the top of them, it's not like they're just cheesy and seem out of place and they're just trying to make a song brutal and edgy or anything like that. So it was just kind of interesting. Another thing that I liked back then was it kind of had like these clean vocal chorusy parts, which was another way for me to kind of bridge the gap between, straight up death metal and something maybe more like metalcore or more clean vocal bands and songs and stuff. And so I know that caught my attention back then, because there were still parts where the clean vocals would come in and it kind of gave you a melody line to sing. But again, 2, 3 years later, not a big deal. I don't need that anymore to pay attention to a song or a band. But it still sounded good here too. It doesn't sound completely out of place. Maybe at times a little bit, but overall I think the clean vocals sounded good too. So my favorite song off of this album is called Clandestine Ways, Crocodile Rot. And even to this day, I'm still a sucker for a good groove and a good breakdown. And there's a fucking breakdown where the singer of Cattle Decap, I don't know his name, so don't yell at me for not knowing his name. I'm sorry, I don't know every band member in every band, okay? There's this breakdown going on and in Clandestine Ways, and he's just laying these pig squealy vocals over the top, and I mean, it just sounds fucking intense. And then a little bit later on, there's a really cool solo in that song that I really enjoy too. And then there's a couple other grooves and riffs and stuff like that I enjoyed. A few other songs that stuck out to me, Mammals in Babylon, Mutual Assured Destruction, and Pacific Grim. And Pacific Grim is really cool because it's the last song on the album. And I think it's a great way to end the song because it kind of has... it kind of has everything that is the album, I think it has a little bit of clean singing, but I know it has super heavy riffs and grooves and shit like that, and I think it's a good wrap up. It kind of encompasses everything that the album touches on. So then, to kind of end this review, I have 3 things that I want to touch on as far as the actual sound itself of the album. And so the first is production. And I think this is another good album to start with because the production is so clean and it's pretty even between all the parts. I don't feel like there's anything that's overshadowed or kind of pushed forward. I think it's a little guitar heavy in production. It makes the guitar kind of stand out a little bit more, which is fine because I enjoy guitar. I play a little bit of guitar, so that part's fine. It doesn't bug me at all. Other than that, it's pretty even throughout. The production, it doesn't really make anything stand out too much, but everything's clear cut. You can hear everything. You can hear the drums, you can hear the vocals, you can hear the guitar, you can hear the bass for sure. So I like the production of it. It's super clean. It's not dirty. It's I think that's, another part that kind of bridges the gap between deathcore and death metal with this album is the production is so clean, which I know some people don't like. I know some people like their death metal to be a little bit more nastier sounding and not quite as clean and cut. But for someone like me who's trying to dive down the rabbit hole, I think the production is actually a really big turn on. The second part is song structure. So I already touched on it, but most of the songs have like what I would call a chorus where they bring in a clean vocal style, and I don't know which member of the band is doing it, but and I think that part is kind of what makes it stand out a lot from death metal. Is you don't hear very many clean choruses or anything like that in death metal, but I think for the purpose of trying to get someone into death metal, this is a great starting point because those clean choruses bring some melody and stuff into the mix that can really allow you to, you know, kind of hold on to something other than just fucking blast beats and grooves all the time and guttural vocals and shit like that. There's a good variety between, you know, heavy grooves and breakdowns and riffs and all that kind of stuff, super fast double bass. But then they bring in a little bit of ambience too. They bring in some clean guitar, like acoustic guitar, and they bring in some calmer parts and kind of slow things down and build up to things, and then, you know, build back down once those heavy parts are over. And there's so that's kind of cool to hear too, is that they don't just have to nail you over the head the whole time. They can switch things up, and so I like that. And then the third thing that I want to hit, because I think it's one of the most important things in death metal, is the vocals. And again, I think it's varied. This guy can do gutturals, he can do pig squeals, he can do the high shrieks. I'm not sure if it's the same guy doing the cleans and the harsh vocals. If it is, props to him, because that's pretty sweet. If it's not, the cleans they're kind of weird sounding. They're not like, I don't think they're meant to be pretty, and they're definitely not pretty, but that doesn't really detract from the overall. It fits really well. It doesn't detract from the album at all. The cleans, because I don't think they were really meant to be pretty, they are kind of still meant to be a little edgy and shit. I think they add to the album. I think they change things up enough to where it's different throughout the album, but it's not so different that you're kind of thrown off. And maybe in a couple parts here and there, but overall, I think the cleans sound great. So then the final thing is the rating, and I'm going to give this album an 8. I was on the fence between a 7.5 and an 8. I probably would have given it like a 7.5 when it first came out. Excuse me. Now I'm going to give it an 8. I think it's a really good album. I'm definitely going to go back and listen to it some more. I'm glad that I'm doing these reviews so I could go back and listen to it, because once I turned it on, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that part, I remember this part, you know, oh, that's a cool riff or whatever, I remember that scream. And so I'm glad I went back to it. It's not an amazing album by any stretch of the imagination, but it's definitely a good one. And so 8 out of 10 would recommend to a friend. And there you have it. There's the first Young James Does Death Metal review. So all the people in Into the Combine's Patreon Facebook page can, you know, revel in the fact that they're getting Young James down the death metal rabbit hole. We got a lot to go. We got 14 bands left to do. Albums, I should say. We got 14 albums left to do. And so I'm not going to give them out. I'm not going to tell what order I'm doing them in. I kind of have an order that I have for them, and hopefully it works out. So thank you guys for watching.